This is hashtag Gen Z, a podcast that explores Generation Z, who they are, how they're different from other generations, what they think is cool, what moves them, and why they do what they do. I'm your host, Meghan Grace. Welcome back. In this episode, we're talking about something that's at the heart of how Gen Z is building relationships, identity, and community. And that's gathering. We know that digital connection is second nature to Gen Z, but it turns out they're craving more than just likes and DMs. According to a recent Eventbrite report, 95% of young adults want to explore their online interests through in-person events, and 84% say they're forming close relationships through those event-based gatherings. So what does that look like in practice? Well, enter the concept of fourth spaces, an evolution from the classic third space coffee shop vibe. Think Friends Central Perk. Fourth spaces are intentionally designed gatherings built around shared passions and a desire for meaningful connection. Whether it's a poetry and painting night, a sober curious supper club, or even a cheese rave. Yes, that's a real thing. Gen Z is redefining what it means to come together in real life. To help me unpack this, I'm joined by Alexis Benveniste, a writer and trends expert at Eventbrite. Alexis brings a journalist's curiosity and a gatherer's heart to her work, exploring how young people are shaping the future of community and connection. Trust me, this is a conversation that'll make you want to RSVP yes to something new.
Hey, we're the Payroll Baddies, and our mission is to make payroll fun and relatable.
And call out industry when we hear it.
You gotta call it out. You gotta call it like you see it. But we also gotta shine a light on all those unsung payroll heroes out there, making sure we get paid.
Yeah, those are the real payroll baddies out there, and we love sharing their stories and showing them love.
With gold chain and everything, baby.
By the way, SAP is the best payroll out there, and if you don't like it,
Get out.
Welcome. I am excited to have a great guest join us today and talk about, I think, a very important topic when it comes to building relationships, and that's gathering. But before we get into that, I want to welcome our guest, Alexis. Welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, I am happy to and excited to talk a little bit about the research and the work that Eventbrite has been doing recently around gathering. But before we get into that, I would love to know a little bit more about you. Can you tell us about your story, kind of the work that you do in your role, and a little bit of the journey of how you got to that?
Absolutely. So I am a writer and trends expert for Eventbrite. I've always been really passionate about diving into trends and data and telling stories from there. So Eventbrite's really the perfect place to do that. There are so many incredible events on the platform and engaged people who attend them. So there's just a lot to learn and explore. And I found that it's particularly interesting as we're diving into trends and themes for Gen Z. So it's been great.
How did you get into the work of, I know you said you like to do like data storytelling. What led you to Eventbrite and wanting to work specifically there and tell the stories that they are engaging with?
So I worked in traditional journalism for about a decade, working in newsrooms. And at one point in my career, started to sort of lean more on experiences that were looking at the intersection of product and editorial. And that's sort of what Eventbrite is as well. Just looking at a brand that has a really interesting story to tell is something that was always super fascinating to me, really creatively fulfilling. And so it felt like a really natural fit. I myself am such a gatherer. I love getting people together and having them over for dinner and having just like special moments with people across generations and my peers. So it felt like a natural fit to dive into working with Eventbrite. And I think the company is at a really exciting time right now. There's a lot going on. And I think people are really eager to gather in person, including me. I don't know if you feel that way and if you've seen that with your friendships as well. But I think gathering in person has become so huge. We're all getting burned out on social media and our phones. And so Eventbrite is that place that people are coming to kind of find those meetups, find that community. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of that storytelling. So that's how I ended up there.
That's wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about that, the work that Eventbrite has recently done and engaging in some of the research around Gen Z specifically and how Gen Z is gathering and fostering relationships. Can you walk us through some of the key findings and insights that recent study produced?
Definitely. So the biggest thing is that Gen Z wants to take their online interests offline. It's so easy to get caught in scrolling, and there's a lot of great elements of social media where you see something you really identify with or are interested in. But the new trend that we're seeing with Gen Z and millennials is called fourth spaces. So basically, they're taking all of these interests that they've developed online and bringing them into the real world in super creative ways. So the numbers are really wild. 95% of young adults want to explore their online interests through in-person events. Again, it's, all about getting together, meeting people, forming those relationships, forming a community. And, we've all mastered the element of digital connection and being able to text and call and FaceTime and post. But now I think, everyone's craving that face-to-face experience. I know everyone's craving that face-to-face experience. That's what we're seeing. So these gatherings are serving deeper purposes. It's not just a one-off experience. 84% of people are saying that they're forming close friendships through the meetups, which is really huge considering how hard it can be to make friends as an adult.
So, Alexis, some people might not know what a fourth space is. Can you give us just a little intro to that concept and why it's feeling relevant for Gen Z and millennials right now?
Absolutely. So, a fourth space is essentially a community and event space, a gathering that you're creating with other people who have like-minded interests. So there was a concept called third spaces, which people are kind of saying, not home, not the office, but the third space, which is where they gather. And the fourth space is even more intentional than that. So it's finding a meetup, an event, a get together that really taps into what you're interested in and passionate about. So it's not just a cafe or a library, not that there's anything wrong with those great spaces, but something that's really intentional and passion driven and, based on what you're really interested in and wanting to learn more about. That's essentially what a fourth space is. And so meeting other people in those spaces and creating communities and going back to those spaces and going back to similar events and whether that's finding a creator who put something together that's super interesting to you or finding a space that's particularly creative and cool and taps into maybe a crossover of two things you love. That's sort of what the element of or the idea of fourth spaces is.
That's really helpful. So, for that third space, I always think about how one of the most famous third spaces is probably Central Perk on Friends, right?
Yep.
They're just either in their two apartments or they're at Central Perk or at some random place, right? And so, I feel like that's the one that millennials probably could name straight away, or if they were 90210, the Peach Pit, right? It's that kind of ambiguous, but it's a public space that doesn't necessarily have an intentional purpose. It's a little more free flowing in its boundaries. But what you're saying is these fourth spaces are very intentional to bring people together for a very specific reason and much more interest related and passion related in that regard.
Exactly.
So when we think about how the research that Eventbrite has been doing around Gen Z gathering and Gen Z relationships, what can you tell us about how Gen Z is approaching relationship building differently than previous generations?
So Gen Z is really rewriting the relationship playbook. They're starting their connections digitally first and then bringing them into the physical world. So what makes this approach unique is seeing how they're deliberately fusing online and offline worlds. So it's not about, like we were talking about, meeting randomly at bars or cafes or through mutual friends. They're strategically finding people who share their interests online and then creating purpose-built fourth spaces, which we just talked about, to deepen those connections in person and face-to-face.
So if Gen Z were trying to find some of those fourth spaces and find kind of that passion-driven or interest-driven opportunity for connection, what advice would you have for Gen Z trying to do that?
I think the biggest thing is being open-minded. So it's all about having fun. That means embracing being open and curious. You don't have to go into it feeling like you're going to meet your new best friend or make a romantic connection if that's what you're looking for. It's really just to have a good time. And it's always worth it to go to an event that's slightly outside of your comfort zone. I've even found that for myself. And trying a hybrid experience, like a mashup, for example, that blends a few different things you might be interested in is really fun. So looking at board game nights, cooking workshops, creative meetups, just kind of seeing what could unfold. So there's a lot of interesting things on Eventbrite, like poetry and painting, reading and running, wine tasting with an author, which sort of like has that wine element and the literary element, which is very cool. But our data showed that shared passions are basically the foundation of all of these relationships for Gen Z. So about 45% of Gen Z said they found identity and belonging as their main motivation for joining these communities in the first place, which, as much as it might feel like you're able to get that online sometimes, there's nothing like that in-person connection. And Gen Z is much more fluid with how they're categorizing their social experiences. So nearly 80% said that they preferred events that blended multiple interests together, which we just touched on. So a yoga class that incorporates art, a game night that includes a food element, really tapping into a few different things they're interested in and getting creative about what that could entail. So it's less about rigid social categories and more about creating a multidimensional experience.
So I really appreciate the idea of not just like keeping it very surface level of like you can make friends, right? Because I think that that's ultimately like everyone kind of wants friends or like they want that social connection to some degree. And some of the research that we've done, we found that it's shared values is really important. And what I'm hearing is like shared values and this idea of like an identity and belonging, those feel a little bit deeper level to me. Or like they seem like Gen Z is desiring relationships that are beyond transactional and they're deeper and they're rooted in things that I think are a little bit further under the surface than potentially just being like, oh, well, I like painting, so I'm going to go to this painting evening, right? Am I kind of getting into that correctly?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think the most interesting thing about Gen Z is their approach to authenticity and connection. It's huge. They've mastered this blend of sort of, physical and digital worlds, which is what Fourth Spaces is all about. And that's how these purpose-driven gatherings end up kind of growing and flourishing. So I'm impressed by how creative Gen Z is generally when it comes to bringing online communities into the real world. They're kind of reinventing social connection on their own terms. And I think that's super powerful and really important to disconnect sometimes from the social media element of things, show up in person, meet people. I personally live in New York, and I know every time I go to an event or do something, I meet at least one person who's super interesting, and I'm really glad that I did it. And so I think it's all about pushing yourself and not being too tied to what you think your passions are, but just seeing what looks interesting to you. There's so many different options and so many events. Just seeing what sounds exciting and allowing yourself to experiment with that.
I love that. So I want to kind of take a moment and not think about Gen Z for a second, but also think about Gen Z at the same time. I do a lot of work with people, whether it is colleges and universities, educators, community programs, churches, employers, you name it. There's a lot of eyeballs on Gen Z from people that are not Gen Z that want to engage this group and they want to build relationships with them. They want them to be coming to events. I hear it a lot of like, well, they just don't want to go to the conference or they don't want to be going to the social gathering for fill in the blank, or they're struggling to engage this generation to show up in person. And that feels counter to what you're seeing and the research that Eventbrite's doing, that there is a desire for it. So how can we kind of bridge that gap between what feels like a lot of people wanting to engage and bring Gen Z into their events and their gatherings and that disconnect of what feels like they're not seeing that manifest? How can we kind of help those groups to better engage Gen Z and bringing them together?
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing is meeting people where they're at and doing your research. And that means having options, really tapping into what that community wants and what they're interested in, and not just thinking about what would be effective, from your perspective. So doing something that's engaging and fun and creative and that has sort of different takeaways for Gen Z in terms of having that experience be really intentional and interesting. I think the biggest thing is we're living in a world with so many options, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be intentional about how we gather and how we create. Putting something out there, they say the hardest thing is actually creating it and making something exist. But I think being really smart and intentional and, putting in thorough research as to what your audience wants, what they're looking for, what they need. Why is the event different? What can you provide that's fun? So I think the biggest thing is meeting people where they're at, doing your research, being really thorough in the option you're giving them for the event. And Eventbrite is very intentional about the kind of events that we have and that we put together as a company. For example, we are hosting a cheese rave, and that includes, cheese and dancing, which is sort of a fun mashup. But I think tapping into things that are creative, interesting, conversation worthy, and looking at why someone would want to attend your event and what value you're adding to the conversation and the experience, that's the biggest thing. It is true, no one wants to just show up at a traditional conference anymore. No one wants to sit in a windowless hotel ballroom and learn for 6 hours. That format is no longer interesting. So it's all about just getting innovative and creative with what you're providing and what your structure looks like.
So I think that is, Alexis, a really good point to those who are kind of on the event side or the organizing side, that maybe it is a good time for a refresh and thinking about really what are the intended outcomes of a gathering, whether it's professional or personal, and are we being, I would say, as direct about the value that's provided to the attendees. If that's what I'm hearing, is that maybe we're missing the mark sometimes and being direct about what is the value of attending. And I think about all the conferences that I go to where people are like, we just can't get the Gen Z to come. And I'm like, well, maybe they've never been to a conference and they don't really know what it's about. And we're not doing a good job of illuminating it because for whatever reason, like it's not landing. And it's maybe getting back to the communication basics of like why you need to attend, who it's a good fit for, what you can expect out of it. Is that kind of in line with what you're seeing as could be helpful? Because I don't think the conference and the gathering space is going to go away anytime soon in professional entities, but I do think that there is a necessity for a little bit of a shakeup.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is getting creative and not holding yourself to an old playbook of what works and just seeing what could work, what is interesting, what is culturally and socially relevant, and how you can stand out and make people want to attend an event and be excited about it.
Yeah, I do think that I've been to a lot of wash, rinse, repeat kind of events that could stand for a little bit of that to make it more memorable, to make it a reason, realistically, a reason to leave your house in your sweatpants, right? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more back to Gen Z and thinking about this group of people as event attendees or those who might be wanting to gather. Your research is pointing due north that yes, there is this desire to do it. There might be a little apprehension or a little bit of nervousness, but you've kind of talked about the need for that. What advice can we provide to Gen Z who are really trying to be more intentional in their gathering and moving from online spaces to offline spaces, and making those experiences and events meaningful and worthwhile as attendees?
I think the biggest thing is that when you show up, you're going to meet someone else, at least one person who's interested in the things that you are, just by nature of showing up and by nature of trying it. And while it's a little scary to try something new sometimes, there will be other people there who are in the same boat. I think of it kind of like freshman year of college. You're all showing up the first day and, you're encouraged to keep your door open so you can make friends, and everyone's sort of in the same boat. When you show up to these events, everyone is there with a common goal and purpose and passion. No one's being forced to be there. Everyone is gathering because they want their interests to come to life in a meaningful way. And there's really nothing but goodness that can come from it, whether or not you leave with a friend. Being able to have that even moment of community is really special, and being able to be intentional about how you pursue the things you're interested in is really awesome. And I think once you sort of rip off the Band-Aid of going to that first event and putting yourself out there and getting over the jitters of that, it sort of snowballs in an amazing way into a collection of events that you can go to. And, perhaps you really love the person who put on that event, and then you can sort of follow the other events they're hosting on Eventbrite. Or you make a friend and they say, say you go to a jewelry making class and they're like, I've actually always wanted to learn how to embroider, and that's something you're interested in too. It sort of continues in this beautiful domino effect of just filling your life with interesting and creative moments of gathering that maybe you wouldn't otherwise experience. So it's worth putting yourself out there. And, it's like exercising. They say the hardest part is getting out of the house. Same thing with events. Like, push yourself to get out of the house, to show up, to say hi to one random person. They might introduce you to someone else who introduces you to someone else. And before you know it, you have this whole new group of friends. And so it's always worth it to just put yourself out there and step outside of your comfort zone a little bit. And, based on our data, we found that 73% of 18 to 35-year-olds plan to attend a live event, an Eventbrite event in the next 6 months. So that is really telling. And, more than ever, people are really interested in having these experiences. So you're going to meet someone who's in the same boat as you are.
I really do love that framing that you have of it's kind of like going to the gym or exercising, right? That's a big one for me of if I know I have a class that I've committed to, I'm going to go. And like it's like it becomes the routine after a while. And then it's the thing you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or whatever your schedule might be. Right. And so I think it's also this idea of just like going to the gym or starting a new physical activity, you're building new skills, and social skills have to be practiced. If you don't use them, you lose them and you get weird. And so it can be scary the first time we do something new. But as you've pointed out, there's a lot of benefit there. And so I think that both for our Gen Z listening that are like, should I go to that event in my community? I was kind of concerned about. I think we would both say yes. But I also hear there's a lot of promise for people that are planning events and are planning gatherings that want to bring more Gen Z in, is that it is an opportunity to get connected with people. And we just have to be better about explaining that value.
Definitely. And, going back to the gym analogy, it really is like building a muscle. And so focusing on putting yourself out there every single time it gets easier, every single time it gets more intuitive. Just putting yourself out there and trying it is so important. And I think the cool thing that we found is there's so many different areas of interest and spaces where this is happening. So there's, culinary circles, so food related events like supper clubs, which are super popular, specialized cooking workshops. And then there's live social shows like concerts and comedy events. There's game-based gatherings. So that can tie into board game events. There's creative classes like we talked about, crafting, jewelry making, etc. So I think, all of that. And then, of course, going back to the wellness angle again, a lot of sort of healthy hangouts, as we call them. So wellness gatherings like running events went up 130%. I don't know about you, but I see run clubs everywhere, and they're only becoming more popular. Even in my neighborhood, there are flyers and QR codes for run clubs, which is really cool to see. And I think that's sort of a low stakes way to meet people too, because you have an accountability buddy, you're exercising together, you meet and talk to someone. I actually went to a run club event in my neighborhood and made a friend, and we still keep in touch. So I think that's really cool. And we also saw sober curious gatherings growing massively. So they grew 92% because a lot of people are interested in experiencing a sober curious lifestyle. But I think this is all to say that there really is something for everyone. It's just a matter of getting niche, getting focused on what you want, and then sort of diving in and just showing up and trying something and not being afraid to say hi to that one person, because it could change your whole experience.
Correct. And I do love that you pointed out like the desire for, I would say, socializing around like substance-free experiences. We're seeing that like just that growth around Gen Z being more sober curious than previous generations. And I think that so much, like I think of it in like the professional world or in the work world, like so much of gathering is around like a happy hour or a reception or a place where someone might feel a little bit more pressured to drink when they don't necessarily want to. And so it's great to see that there is that desire in some spaces for those who are not interested in drinking, still finding places to connect and to build relationships. And so I appreciate you pointing that out, and just the idea that like we can also gather and build relationships around wellness. I will not be joining a run club, but that's because I don't like running. No shade to the run clubs. I would complain the whole time and I would not be a positive community member. But I really appreciate you kind of giving us a glimpse into the ways that Gen Z is gathering, what they're interested in gathering in. But I like to ask every guest as kind of a wrap up of our conversation, what is your favorite thing about Gen Z and potentially the Gen Z that you work with?
My favorite thing is how open Gen Z is. I think that the way they approach social situations and the world and society is very open-minded and non-labeled, and I just think that's really cool, and I'm impressed by how creative they are when it comes to bringing their online communities into the real world and reinventing social connection. It's awesome to see so many people ready and open to just trying something new and exploring and experimenting, and I think that can only lead to good things and more creativity and more creation, and Eventbrite loves that too and is totally leaning into that. And so seeing a whole generation pioneering new ways of building community that feel more purposeful and authentic is really awesome.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you kind of introducing that concept of the fourth space and how that, I think it shines a more direct light on what we've known about Gen Z for a while, is that they're multifaceted in their interests. So they might professionally be an accountant, but they are very passionate about photography. And that's how they want to spend their nights and their evenings and their weekends, is engaging in a photography community. And they might need a space to gather with people like that. And it's not work related, and it's not home related, and it's not just some random cafe. They want a place where they can be around other people. Or it might be that they're passionate about dance, but that's not their full-time job. And so they're still very committed to the art of the hobby or the art of the creative pursuit, which I do think is just really inspiring, because I think a lot of young people, especially, you get really caught up in building your career and not necessarily building a life outside of the career. And it sounds like Gen Z is still on that beat. And I think that that's a fantastic energy that they're bringing into their communities.
I totally agree.
Well, Alexis, it's been wonderful to connect with you, to learn more about the great work that Eventbrite's doing, not only in being a great platform to bring people together, but doing some of that deeper research to understand why young people are gathering, how they're gathering, and what they're hoping to get out of it. What are some of the best ways that, if any listeners want to stay connected with you or the work that Eventbrite's doing, how can they follow along and stay connected?
So you can check out Eventbrite's website and newly designed app. It looks really, really fantastic, and it's all about helping people discover and find things in their community. So I highly recommend doing that and just diving into the world of Eventbrite and seeing what appeals to you. And then for me, you can follow me on Instagram at @APBenven.
Wonderful. Well, Alexis, thank you for stopping by and sharing some of these insights with us. I know I'm excited to go into my next gathering with friends and family with some intentionality and making it a memorable experience.
Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Bob Pulver, host of You Podcast. Human-centric AI, AI-driven transformation, hiring for skills and potential, dynamic workforce ecosystems, responsible innovation. These are some of the themes my expert guests and I chat about, and we certainly geek out on the details. Nothing too technical. I hope you check it out.
This conversation with Alexis left me feeling energized and a little more excited to get out from behind my screen. Here are a few takeaways that stood out. 1, Gen Z is redefining relationships by starting them online, but intentionally bringing them into physical spaces that reflect their passions and values. 2, fourth spaces are on the rise, creating multidimensional gathering experiences that blend interests like art, food, movement, and community into something truly memorable. And 3, whether you're hosting or attending, the key to meaningful connection is intentionality, curating experiences that are rooted in identity, belonging, and shared exploration. So here's your action step this week. Say yes to showing up to something. Find an event that sparks your interest. Or if you're someone who plans gatherings, challenge yourself to rethink the format, get creative, be specific, and build something that matters. You can find Alexis online at @APBenven, or check out the Eventbrite app to explore your own fourth space. I'll be sure to link both of those in the show notes. As always, I want to thank you for tuning in. If this episode was something that really spoke to you, please be sure to share it with a friend or someone that you might want to take life from online to in real life with. I'd love for you to take a moment, though, to rate, review, and share if you feel like someone needs a little nudge to gather with more intention. The fun of season 7 is just getting started, and there are more great conversations on the way. Subscribing is the best way to make sure you don't miss new episodes when they become available. If you have a guest or a topic that you think we need to explore on #Gen Z, head over to my website and share via the form on the page meghanmgrace.com/podcast. We can also stay connected on Instagram and LinkedIn, where you can find me under the handle Meghan M. Grace. This episode was edited by Lee Kramer, the Gen Zer behind the scenes that brings this podcast to life. Thank you again for stopping by. Let's continue this conversation, and we'll chat soon.